Now, when we go through the notes and when we talk through stuff in class, I do want you to ask questions if there are things that I go over too quickly. I do want you to make sure that I explain it clearly. Sometimes I do tend to go a little bit fast, so please don't hesitate to ask. With this being typically a senior level course or junior level course, I would anticipate that you'd be able to take notes based on what I do on the board. It should not be a verbatim or word for word. This is, I have to write it down exactly the way Mr. Jones said it. It should be in your own words. That is going to be the best way to transfer the information long term. There may be a time or two where I say you need to copy this down exactly the way I say it, or I have it on the board if it's something specific. But even when I put a definition up on the screen, put it in your own words because you will remember it so much better than if you just copy it down exactly the way I have it. So if there's certain things where you can abbreviate or you can use shorthand, please do so to give yourself the best opportunity to remember what's going on. There we go. So, chapter 1. Hope I turn this on. We're going to begin by talking about the idea of the state and what that means. So, the government is the institution by which society makes and enforces policies, but the state has a different meaning. And the state itself, we'll get to in a moment. I thought I had that first, but we'll talk about government, then we'll get to the state. So government makes and enforces policy. And as they make and enforce those policies, they put those together, and we call that politics. How many of you are following what's going on in the Oval Office, the White House, with Donald Trump and the media right now? Some of you are paying attention to that. What is one of the biggest criticisms that he is getting with the whole Virginia issue? Does anybody know? Yeah, his stance on it. He's saying both sides are at fault. What do people want him to do? Yes, they want him to completely side with the extremist groups. Now, I don't want to cause any kind of division. I don't really want to get in a long discussion of this, but what's going on there is the media is wanting him to play the politics game where he is coming out and saying the politically correct thing, which for his career and for the warm fuzzies of the nation, everybody wants him to come out and say, well, the KKK, the white supremacist groups, they're all wrong, which he has said that. But he's also said that those that attacked them were wrong in the way in which they did it. And so he has said everybody's having some blame. And that's one thing about Donald Trump is that he has said that he's not going to play the idea of the politics game. But as we look at making the public policies, and he is clearly making a public policy by the way he is running the presidency, whether you agree with it or you don't. And I'm not going to ask your opinion on that right now. But every president and every government official has a certain agenda and policy that they are trying to enforce or trying to accomplish while they are in office, and that is part of what we have as politics. So the public policies are often translated into laws. If the president has his way, he is going to get laws passed that will benefit his policies, and they will be credited to what he is trying to accomplish. So oftentimes, those political ideas, those agendas will get written up into these long documents that make laws for our country. And they can cover so many different issues. Things from civil rights, which is a big deal right now, immigration, taxation. I mean, it's a variety of things. So government operates in a particular way based on the beliefs of the people and the nation involved. We can't have dictatorships. So how would you define a dictatorship, or how would you describe a dictatorship for me?
The power of the government is in the hands of either one person or a group.
Good. So typically with a dictatorship, we're going to look at an individual. Now an oligarchy, a group, would be a form of a dictatorship. So one person is typically setting the politics, setting the agenda, making the laws, and he is going to act, or maybe she, is going to act independent of the will of the people. So the people do not get an opportunity to influence the politics or the laws of the government. Can somebody give me an example? North Korea is a dictatorship. Good. Yeah. Anybody else think of another one, either current or historical? Russia. Technically, I don't know for sure. I'm not sure that they are a dictatorship because I think they have a parliament. Yeah. But if we want to go back to Cold War Russia, yes. Yes, under Stalin.
Under Hitler?
Yeah,
Germany?
Adolf Hitler. I love studying Adolf Hitler because when I was in high school, I did not understand how he came to power and the fact that he was not a dictator to begin with, and then how he usurped the power and transformed Germany into a dictatorship from a parliamentary government. It's fascinating. So we have dictatorships, then we have democracy. The key difference between dictatorship and democracy is whose involvement? The people, exactly. So in a democracy, the people will be able to have their influence on the laws, politics, policies that are set within the government. So that is the key differential that you need to make sure that you keep straight. And I know most of us have in our mind, we know what a dictatorship is. We know a democracy means that we get to vote on stuff. But it's the influence of the people, the involvement of the people. So we talk about state, and I'm going to skip across that one. I'm going to go here to the meaning of state. When we think of a state, there's a lot of different meanings that can come to our mind. Sometimes people substitute the word nation. But when we're talking about government and politics, when we see the word nation, you ought to associate the idea of ethnic groups as a nation. So these are people that have similar language, similar religion, customs. That makes them distinct from a different group of people. So in my mind, I often think to the nation of Israel of Old Testament times. And a lot of times when you study them or when they're mentioned in Scripture, they're talked about the nation of Israel. So they're an ethnic group, a religious group that are bonded together by that identity. When we hear the word country, we should associate that with a place or region, an area, more of the physical border of the United States of America. So when we define state, there are 4 elements that help us to define what a political state or a governmental state would be. And these are not necessarily in any particular order. We first have to look at the population, and we need to understand a little bit about what all that involves. Typically, a state's population has to be permanent, and it has to be self-sustaining. So they're not going to be able to bring in other groups in order to keep their state thriving. They are going to have to be independent on their own. States can often have a wide variety of ethnicities within them. They are not restricted to a single ethnic group or religious group within the state. They can often be diverse, but they're not required to be. Sometimes they can be homogenous, all of one ethnicity, all of one religious group. That is part of what Adolf Hitler wanted to try to accomplish in his cleansing. That is part of what some of the white supremacist groups claim that they want to accomplish in the United States. That's not a requirement of the state, nor really do I think it should be. When it comes to territory, their geographic control area, we got to be careful here because there are some territories that are in question. There are some borders that are disputed. But the state has to have defined borders, and it needs to, if there are borders in question, then that does not mean they're not a state, but we have to be careful about dealing with one country, one nation, and saying that they are claiming that territory and offending or angering the other ones that are claiming that territory as well. So the territory, they typically will have a border there, and if we look at the territory, there's not a minimum area of territory they have to have. There's also not a maximum. So when you guys were reading, what was the smallest territory that the United States recognizes? Remember? Vatican City. How about the largest? Russia. Yeah, that one's kind of a no-brainer. So territory is not. There's Texas. Thank you. Yeah, we made it less than 2 days, and somebody already brought up Texas independence. Well done. Okay, so territory, there's not a minimum definition there of how much territory you need. So then when it comes to government, there are certain times where one state will recognize another, even if the government is in upheaval or the government is in disarray. So we saw this, most year coming direct out of United States history. We saw this in the Civil War when the Confederate States wanted to recruit what nation to recognize them. Yeah, they wanted to bring in Britain, and who eventually came? What European country came to the assistance of the North in the very end? I'm thinking Revolutionary War, aren't I?
Yep.
Yeah, Revolutionary War. Who came in there? France. Okay, so in both of those cases, both Revolutionary War and the Civil War, we were trying to get other nations to recognize one part of the country or another. So in modern day, there are certain countries where we may recognize a government that has been overthrown, even though they're not technically in power anymore. That is kind of up to our political leaders. But just because a government is overthrown or taken over by a political group does not necessarily mean that we have to recognize them. So the existence of ISIS in the Middle East, I realize that their influence is not as big as they were a couple years ago, but we did not recognize ISIS as a political state, even though they held control of a lot of territory there, and they still do in some areas. When it comes to sovereignty, sovereignty is the idea of independent authority over your own country or your own group of people. You make your own decisions as a nation, as a state. In some cases, states may voluntarily give up their rights to make their own decisions. You often see this in time of war. You see this when one state will be under attack, and so they will default or defer to a larger state to protect them, and they will let them make their decisions for them. That has to be on a temporary basis. If it is a permanent giving up of your rights, then they should no longer be recognized as a state. And then please don't confuse state with the 50 states of America when we're talking about state and government. So that's kind of a whole separate entity there. So we come here to the origins of state. And what I'd like for you to do here is I'd like for you in your notes, or if you have your homework packet and you want to pull that out, there are four theories when it comes to how the state began, or how the idea of state government began. And so I'd like for you to get yourself into groups of 4 or maybe 5 at the most, And I want you to go through these 4 theories. If you've not done the homework yet, then they are in your book. You can look them up there. And I want you to get in those groups. I want you to come up with a collective summary of them. So appoint somebody in your group to be the scribe or the writer. And I want you to summarize those. And feel free to pull out, if you've already done this in the homework, pull that out and use that to contribute to your group. And I want you to summarize those. And I want us to be able to discuss those 4 theories here. So I'll give you about 5, maybe 10 minutes to get together and talk about what you found, or look that up if you need to. So find your group and